I'm just a bill, yes I'm only a bill, and I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill. Well, it's a long, long journey to the capital city. It's a long, long week while I'm sitting in committee, but I know I'll be alone. Yeah, at least I hope and pray that I'll be, but today I'm
This is Bill Scher on the Liberal Oasis radio show, WHMP, News, Information, and the Arts, a happier edition than last week's. I think those of us on the left stepped up our game just a little bit. By the time you hear this, I believe the economic recovery bill should be law, if not by now, very, very soon, later today. We tape on Friday. The House is scheduled to vote later today. The Senate either Friday evening or Saturday morning. But full expectation is it passes and will become law likely on Monday. So what does this mean? Well, let's keep in mind what happened over the course of the last few weeks. At the tail end of last week, after the right-wing smear machine was doing what it does, the Senate had gotten wobbly. The so-called Senate centrists, people don't seem to realize that the center is at the 51 point in the Senate, not at the 60 point. That's the center right. But that's where these folks have gotten their power from. They played their cards for all they were worth, and they were emboldened because there was a sense that support for the bill was weakening, that there was a perception that it was full of pork, all that sort of stuff. But what happened? We stepped up. When I talked to you last week, the calls were running 100 to 1 against the bill because the Rush Limbaugh army was flooding Capitol Hill with phone calls. Now, that was wildly disconnected from what all the polling said. But it made folks in Congress get a distorted view of the public pulse. But since then, in fact, on Friday night on the floor, once the Senate compromise deal was reached, Senator Specter said, I'm getting calls on one side that there's too much spending. I'm getting calls from the other side saying there's not enough. That parity was way, way better than where we were a week ago. And I saw another report on the AFL-CIO blog. Someone was calling their congressional offices, and they asked, how are the calls running? And they were told, neck and neck. We did a much better job engaging our representatives in the past week than the week prior, and it made a difference. Now, that's certainly not the only difference. There's a gentleman by the name of Barack Hussein Obama that had an impact on this as well. And once he got out there doing his town halls, doing a press conference, talking to America like we're adults, a new thing in politics. And what he's always been able to do, one of the things I've always been most impressed about him, is the typical right-wing smears have always been very difficult for those of us on the left to deal with because in the media environment, you can only talk in sound bites. You can't fully explain your position, so it's very easy to cherry-pick quotes, take them out of context, distort things, and the like. Obama has always had the ability to not just get the spotlight on him, but then once it's there, to actually speak in paragraphs, not in sound bites, give things a fuller context, and have it be listened to. It's one thing to be a charismatic person and be eloquent. It's another thing to have something to say and have it stick. So the attempt to malign the bill as being full of pork began to fall apart. And in fact, you saw after cherry picking out a few items, $200 million for contraception and re-sign the National Mall and those sorts of things, regardless of their merits, can be tricky to defend in the context of the economic crisis. Obama said, look, just get those things out. It's not worth the energy. This is not the crux of the bill. We can deal with those things separately. The conservatives had run out of pork ammo. So they started moving into education and healthcare and transportation, aid to state governments, things that are not pork, things that are quite critical to turning the economy around. And their argument started to weaken. And the poll numbers shot up 7 points over the last several days leading up to these final votes. That is how we are going to get things done. When you have someone at the top who knows how to talk, knows how to argue, knows how to explain, and is putting his policies in the general correct direction, combined with a grassroots push, we can accomplish a lot. So the thing to do now is, and there's certainly some criticism remaining on the left, and understandably so, it's not a perfect bill. It's very rare to get a perfect bill in this world. But whether you had the House version or the Senate version, neither bill was going to be the solution to our economic problems. Either one was always intended to be a down payment, a step forward, a turning the ship around away from anti-government conservatism towards an active progressive government that actually helps solve our problems. And now we need to build on that victory. It's interesting that there's concerns on the left that there wasn't enough infrastructure in the bill. There's $150 billion in infrastructure in the bill. The American Society for Civil Engineers says that our infrastructure problems total $2.2 trillion over the next 5 years. So whether it was $150 billion or 250, it's a much larger problem than one bill is going to deal with. We had this whole debate. The last sticking points was about school construction. The House bill had it at $16 billion, and the Senate bill zeroed it out, and they ended up doing 10, done in a bit of a funky procedural way that's not ideal. But the National Education Association says our school repair and construction needs top over $300 billion. We have big problems to address because of the years of neglect. I didn't get to the clean energy problem. So the Apollo Alliance says that we have to fully transition to a clean energy economy over a 10-year period. That's $500 billion. This is big stuff, although over the course of a 5-10-year window, it's not as daunting as the price tag might sound. But one bill was never going to get there. This has to be a building block. So the thing to do after this bill gets signed, likely on Monday. Monday is a holiday. I don't expect you to do any grassroots lobbying on Monday. But on Tuesday, you should call your senators and your House representative. And if they voted for the bill, you should thank them. And you should then say, and I want you to get back to work, investing more in infrastructure, in clean energy, in healthcare and education. It's very rare to get a thank you call. People like it. Congressional offices usually just get hammered with people complaining. But if they know that their vote was watched and appreciated, you want this bill to be a momentum starter, not the end of the president's political capital, but the beginning. They need to know that there is support for this larger investment. And you're going to hear lots, I guarantee, that the debt is too big. The budget deficit is too large. Oh, this was already pushing the boundaries way too far. And so everything else needs to be scaled back. And as Paul Krugman has said, it was that kind of thinking that got FDR into trouble in the middle of the New Deal. They got to a point about 4 years in where they said, okay, let's start being, fiscally austere. And they pulled back too early. And that's when unemployment started to rise again. And they corrected themselves and got themselves back on track after that. Mark Zandi, who is an economist, called himself a Democrat, but he also advised the McCain campaign during the presidential election, and said, look, there's something where you throw these numbers, billions and trillions of deficit and debt. What's the most important number is its relation to the overall size of our economy, what they call the debt to GDP ratio. That actually is the only way you can really compare year to year how significant your debt is. Right now, it's about the debt to GDP ratio is about 40%. It's not an unusual number. We've been around that way for a very long time, and many other industrialized countries are at that level or higher. And Mark Zandi said, we can go up to 60, 70%. It's not that big of a deal. It's been done. It's manageable. So once you appreciate that we're in a serious economic crisis on a host of fronts, not just in the financial sector, not just because the banking industry went off half-cocked, but there is an infrastructure crisis, there's a healthcare crisis, and there's an energy crisis, and there's an education crisis. Education is not affordable to enough people. Schools are falling apart across the country. Healthcare costs are skyrocketing. We're still dependent on dangerous and deadly fossil fuels that are going to kill the planet over the long run. And our infrastructure is crumbling on a host of fronts. If we can invest more, and we can handle an increased debt load for the next several years, that's not just okay, that's desirable.